All right, what's up, guys? Ryan from Elevate Cyber here, and this is a continuation on a series called What You Need to Know for OSCP. In this video, we're going to be covering msfvenom. Sounds like a lot of you guys have really enjoyed the original video I made in this series, so we're just going to keep on going with this and covering as many tools for OSCP as are relevant, pretty much. And this is definitely one that you use quite a bit in OSCP. That's why I wanted to cover this pretty early on in the video series. I know I had in the past started some msfvenom videos, but I really wanted to do it more justice here. There's a lot that you can do with this tool, so I wanted to really distill it down to what you would actually need to know for OSCP, but it will also apply to CTFs in general if you guys are doing other CTFs or just trying to study and learn on your own. You don't really care about certifications at the moment. This is still going to be very valuable information, I do believe. So let's just get right into it. Here is a list at how I distilled down some of the most common, payloads and commands that you would need to know with msfvenom. Now, quick overview. msfvenom is used when you're trying to generate payloads. So maybe you're doing like a buffer overflow attack and you need to generate some hex code that you can put in, like inject into the script to spawn a shell, connect to your listener, and then you have access to that system. You can have code execution on it, right? That is probably the most common scenario that you're going to use it in a CTF or OSCP scenario. But there's also other use cases for it as well. Like maybe you're just trying to generate some virus executable that you can drop onto USB and do like a USB drop or something like that, right? So basically you're just trying to generate something that's going to spawn a shell and connect to your listener. That's pretty much how I would summarize it. As far as the actual commands, the payloads, you have -L to list stuff. So you can list all the payloads. You can list the different formats that are supported. So by formats, I mean you can generate a payload that is in a WAR file or Python code, PHP code, ASP, whatever format you want. There's a lot of supported formats. I'll run those at the end of the video so you can see, but I want to start off with what is the most pertinent information. So just remember, if you ever are unsure of what options you have for payloads or formats or anything like that, you can run these respective commands here and very quickly find out what options you have. Now, as far as actually generating the payload, this is the general sort of template for that you use most on the OSCP and stuff. So of course, you start with the name of the command, which is msfvenom-p. You would choose a payload, and we'll cover payloads here shortly. And you would give it lhost, and you would pass it the IP address of your Kali machine, your attacker machine, and then lport, whatever port you are listening on with your listener is what port you would put in here. And then -F, you would, whatever format you need, like maybe you were exploiting a IIS server, you would have like an ASPX format here, right? -F, ASPX in that case. And then -O for output payload file name. So if you want it to output to a file, maybe you got some file upload on a server. Going back to that IIS example, generate that ASPX format. And you can actually save it as a ASPX file that you can then upload to the server. And when you execute that file, it'll connect back to your listener. Now, getting into the payloads, you have three different, I guess we should say, categories of payloads here. You have interpreter payloads, staged payloads, and stageless payloads. The best one to get, if you can, is a interpreter payload, just because it has a lot of functionality built in, and you're able to leverage Metasploit for that. Now, specific to the OSCP, I will say you are allowed to use the interpreter, the multi-handler in Metasploit as much as you want. While it is true that you can only use Metasploit framework once on the exam, you are free, and I repeat this, you are free to use the Metasploit multi-handler as much as you want on the exam. They have openly announced this. This is something you can do. So anytime you're doing buffer overflow or anything like that, and you can go for this Meterpreter payload and then set up the multi-handler to accept the Meterpreter payload, and you can technically use Metasploit in that context. Now, I'm pretty sure it will count as using Metasploit if you use like the post-exploitation modules and some of the Metasploit specific stuff after you get your connection on the multi-handler, but you're actually able to use this multi-handler. Let me just quickly explain what I'm talking about in case you're not familiar with multi-handler, right? Let me just go into my root account here real quick. So if I fire up MSF console, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. These Meterpreter shells are really nice because they give you access to a whole suite of features, as well as being able to migrate to different processes with your shell, which can be very useful on OSCP because there's certain boxes that they're basically configured in a way that it'll instantly close you out of your session, and you're going to need to migrate the process really quickly so that you can get a stable shell. But okay, for the multi-handler, I would type use, I believe it's exploit multi-handler, like this. And this is what I'm talking about. This module here, exploit multi-handler. You're able to use this as much as you want. If I check the options here, you basically tell it the IP address of your Kali machine, your attacker machine, whatever port you want to listen on, and then you just hit run. And then you have your listener set up. You can use this listener as much as you want. This does not count towards using Metasploit in and of itself. So just something to really be aware of. Now, while these Meterpreter payloads, and here you go, you have one for 32-bit Linux, 64-bit Linux, 32-bit Windows, 64-bit Windows. That's pretty much all you'd ever need, right? While they're great, there are some limitations with them in the sense that they're very, very large. So this can come into play, and it most certainly will come into play in certain situations within OSCP and probably a lot of other CTFs you might encounter as well, where you don't have, and in the real world certainly, where you don't have enough space to inject such a huge payload, right? Especially with buffer overflow and stuff. Sometimes you're dealing with very limited space. Maybe you're dealing with a low latency, a like high latency environment, like really restricted network bandwidth in a real world engagement. Maybe you're dealing with some limitations like that, and sending all this data across the network to get this really big and bulky shell, not always the best solution or even possible, right? I'm not sure why this is here twice, but what do you do in that situation, right? Well, this is where, one of these really comes into play, right? Your staged and your non-staged. Now, these staged payloads, they're pretty similar to Meterpreter, except that they're not as big. They're not quite as big, as they don't have the full Meterpreter sort of Metasploit functionality within them. And so with these, this is how it looks. This is basically the format here. And again, I provide you guys with a bunch of different options here. There should be a 64-bit one here, but I didn't really find it as something that I would use enough to put it in this video here. You can list out the payloads and find the 64-bit one, but the ones that I found myself using the most was the x86 bind shell, 32-bit reverse shell, and then same thing for Windows here, bind shell and reverse shell respectively. So basically, the idea, really quick to explain, with a reverse shell, it's probably the context you're most familiar with, where you generate a payload that is a reverse shell. You have your listener set up, like I had the multi-handler set up, and once you execute the exploit, it will connect back to your machine. That's what's known as reverse HTTP. Now, the other way is a bind shell, and when you exploit it on the system, instead, it opens up a port on that system, and then you just connect to that. Now, with bind shells, anyone can connect to that port. So that's just something to keep in mind. By default, anyone can. But so there's certain contexts where there might be a firewall or something in place that is preventing you from doing a bind shell or preventing you from doing a reverse shell, some kind of network thing going on, and that's where you'd want to try one or the other. Sometimes you'll have success that way. So, still though, with the staged payloads, they are fairly large. They're not as large as the interpreter payloads, but they still are fairly large. And that is where, if you're really limited on, due to network constraints or maybe due to the actual memory space that you have to fit in a payload, this is where the stageless ones will come into play. These are the most compact payloads that you can have. Now, of course, they're going to be the most bare bones in terms of features, right? There's little things you can do to upgrade your shell using Python and STT-raw-echo and all that stuff. The stuff that we've shown a lot on this channel. But keeping it focused on msfvenom, you'll see that really it's pretty similar to the rest of these. Here I have the most common ones that I've found myself using in OSCP and in CTFs in general. If you need the 64-bit version, it should be pretty simple to find just by running this command here. Now, let's go right into running those commands just to give you guys a good idea of what this type of stuff looks like, right? So if we run msfvenom-l payloads, you'll just see just how many options that you have. Now, I would say for 90% of cases, the information that I just presented you guys should cover most of the scenarios. Here's for the other 10%. In case you need it. This command takes quite a while to complete because there are a lot of payloads out there. And so yeah, here's what it looks like here. You got all kinds of different payloads here. And I should have full screened this first. It would have been more readable. But yeah, you just see just how many different options you have in here. This is why I created this video, right? Because if you didn't know which one to use and you just ran list payloads, like this is overwhelming, right? This is hard to interpret. How the heck do you know which one you need? Well, through time and experience, I learned which ones are the most useful, the most relevant, and those are the ones that I have listed here. Similarly, with formats, if we instead have it list the formats, we can see all the different payload types you can generate, whether it be WAR files, Python, PHP, whatever. So we are, again, this takes a while because you do have just tons of different options for this as well, right? Here you go. Some of the things, VB script, just a raw payload, PowerShell, all that. Not as intimidating as the payloads, but you definitely have a number of options with the formats as well. So that's pretty much all I had for this video. I would definitely recommend you guys check out the previous video that I did on OSCP, what you need to know, because just having a really nice, compact, targeted understanding of these different tools when it comes to doing what you want to do, get the OSCP or, route these boxes on whatever CTFs you're working on. This stuff is going to, I believe, come in really great handy for you guys. So let me know if you guys are enjoying this so far. Definitely subscribe if you are. Let me know by hitting the like button as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.